I'm going to try and argue that what I'm going to do in this talk is the theorization for the three presentations we've seen so far. So I'm going to try and draw some links all the way through, but I should warn you, and I'm sorry if it does get a little bit kind of academic-y slash theoretical slash intellectual slash impossible to understand. That is just a characteristic of my profession. If we don't keep up the facade of appearing like we're smart, then someone will realise we're not, and then we're all in the shit. Okay. So I am going to try and touch on, particularly in the last part, a theorisation. And I'm going to talk about a theorisation of ancestral health in relation to ethics, because I believe it to be a critically important issue for the movement. And here I'm talking not just to you, but I'm talking also to my colleagues in the society and also to everyone else in the wider nutrition / dietetics world. Can I ask a question? How many people here are registered nutritionists or dietitians? Just one. How many are, pardon? I've asked registered purposely. How many are practicing nutritionists, dietitians but are not registered? Okay. Lots of you will so I'm going to point a lot of very barbed comments at the industry of nutritionism / dietetics, okay? And I'm excluding Kate categorically from these discussions, unless she wants to include herself in them, okay, as the only registered person in the room. I'm pointing directly to registration on purpose here, so I will explain. Okay, so I want to say a few things before I begin officially. First thing is, I want to acknowledge the awesome work of a colleague of mine from North Carolina State University, Adele Height. Adele and I are working together on a range of projects which we call critical nutritionism, critical dietetics, and some of what I'm talking about today is Adele's work and my response to that, so I want to acknowledge her. She blogs at eatanthropology.com. It's incredibly funny. Her latest blog post is a satire of the American Dietary Guidelines, and well worth reading. Really, really interesting perspective. So I just wanted to acknowledge Adele's work before I start. Second, to link in here with some thoughts about calmness, I want you to have at the forefront of your mind the massive link that exists between modernity and high capitalism or modern capitalism. Okay, please have that. I'm a heavy critic of this, so please have that in mind. When I talk about modernity, I also am talking about capitalism, and the main point that I want to make on that is capitalism does not want you calm. Okay, it wants you stressed. All right, you're a better consumer when you're stressed. Okay. Now, my apologies to anyone in the room. Sorry.
Can I just ask a quick question? That website, did you say Eat for Apology?
Yeah.
It doesn't work. It doesn't come up.
I may have written it wrong. We'll sort it.
It's only one T.
Oh. Well, we'll sort it out at the end. I'll it definitely exists. I'm sure it does. If it doesn't exist and it's a fantasy of my mind, then we're in trouble. Oh, you've got it. The second thing, I'd like to apologise to anyone in the room who might be very pregnant and about to give birth for the first part of my presentation. I'm not sure if there is anyone, but okay. Sometime around the 17th of June 2010, I'm going to read this a little bit first, I met an amazing woman. She wasn't spectacular in any common sense, but a fairly average health worker. An immigrant from a country in Asia, she had been in New Zealand for years and was then picking up random shifts at a hospital as a midwife. And a chance placed her in our room a few days after our firstborn baby was finally released from the neonatal intensive care unit. This is Ben, my little boy. Still makes me a bit teary, so I'm just not, okay. We were a bit broken by that point. So my wife was physically broken and emotionally, and I was kind of just emotionally broken, I guess you'd say. we'd had more than a long week of very serious worry about the immediate and long-term future of our little but very big baby. He was the largest baby in the neonatal intensive care ward by more than a factor of 2. He was at least twice as big as the next big baby there. Most of them were preemies, and he was about 10.5 pounds or something. So we'd been released, we'd been given the all clear back into the ward, and we had no idea at that stage what issues we might face in the coming weeks, months and years. In fact, we still don't. So a bit of history, my son has a rare genetic disease called Leri-Wheel dyschondrosteosis, which I won't go into the details, but it causes some issues, none of them cognitive, thankfully, except for dyspraxia. But it was a real problem at that stage. And we were just floored. You know, we had no idea what was going on, really. But we really clearly remember the care and attention she gave our baby, and over that time, and particularly remember her imploring us to be flexible in our care of him. She meant to say flexible, but you know, she was an immigrant from an Asian country, so she said flexible. I'm not trying to be rude here. The term flexible is stuck in my mind. And her point was well made, and I think any parents will probably agree. Formulae and structure appear not to be transferable between babies, except if one is persistent past the point of instinct. Persistent past the point of instinct, which is a requirement of capitalism we should not forget. We were worried about the fact that our baby was fed, for instance, because society at the time was pretty damning of bottle feeding at that stage, formula. But the kind midwife was our saviour, and I really want to say savoir here, because I think her, for those of you who speak French in the audience, it's kind of like a representation of knowledge, because she brought knowledge to us. Because she recounted a story of her elderly sister, who is a registered nutritionist living in Australia, currently practicing in her 60s, who was born in the beginning of a period of extreme famine in her home country. And for the first 2 years of her life, the only food the family could find to feed their baby, the mother couldn't breastfeed because of famine, the only food they could find was canned sweetened condensed milk. That was the only thing they had. So she spent 2 years eating only canned sweetened condensed milk. And now she's well into her 60s, essentially uninhibited by this, and works as a nutritionist. She probably has some teeth issues, I guess. One would think. They diluted it when they could, when they had water, you know, but famines are pretty horrible things. So, as privileged middle-class white Westerners, you know, our chins kind of drop to our chest, you know, like, seriously, why could you help, what kind of long-term damage could this diet cause, you know, right at that early, important first stage of life? And it flattened our concerns about latching techniques and nutritional profiles and appropriate baby weight gain under the foot of what I might call the brutality of reality. Because her family had no choice, and protecting one's children is instinctual. You can't get past it. Our experience was polarising by comparison, because we live in an age of choice, you know. We're told, which we are told we should be appreciative of, but for us is instinctually confusing. Choice is instinctually confusing. So fads take advantage of the circumstances that my wife and I faced that day. They're a predator in the urban jungle. Their prey is the consumer with disposable income and the compulsion to choose, the requirement to choose. The very fact that we sit here in this room today, we choose everything we do, and we think we're entitled to it, and we think we enjoy it, we think we love it, okay? So, in this presentation I'm going to try and unravel a wee bit of this. Hopefully I'll get somewhere. And talk about why I think ancestral health has the potential to be ethically different. Okay, so what is a fad? Very simple, really. A fad is an intense and widely shared enthusiasm for something, especially one that is short-lived, like a craze. You know, we can understand that pretty simply. Or any form of behaviour that develops amongst a large population and is collectively followed enthusiastically for a period of time. Note here that the academics don't generally define time. Okay? Generally as a result of that behaviour being perceived as popular by people, you know? Celebrities are a real problem for fads, a huge problem. Because they're so boring as individuals, but... Okay, so I'm just going to show you a few. There's this thing called the tasty pink drink, which apparently is all natural. One tasty pink drink a day melts the fat away. I had this, one of my students came to me and said, I can help you. I wasn't sure that I'd asked for that. But my appearance clearly indicated that I needed help. And she implored me to try one tasty pink drink a day. She didn't realise that, of course, berries and ice and coconut milk is a tasty pink drink. There's the pineapple diet. Has anyone tried that one? It makes your peas like really, really funky. Kind of like asparagus, but you know, yeah, it's not. Plus, if you do go on this diet and you also feed your dogs on this diet, then they'll stop eating their own poo. They will, really. I don't know why that is the case. There's the baby food diet. This exists. This exists. American celebrity personal trainer type person who proposes that if you only eat baby food, it's probably because there's just so much you can do before you just can't eat it anymore. I mean, if you've ever tried baby food, particularly processed baby food, it's quite something. I mean, the apples are useful with pork. This is Weight Watchers. So to me, this is a fad. Okay, this is why I'm saying there's no time here. Time is an interesting thing. What is this? It's this enthused by popularity, driven by popularity. Then there's this book. This is by a local person in Palmerston North. I found this out because I wrote a vicious critique of this on my blog, and the author, who lives in my hometown, I didn't realise, contacted me. Because when you Googled her book, my blog post was the first thing on the list. I didn't mean it to be, but eventually under duress I removed it. But she blogs for Healthy Food Guide. Just FYI, I don't have a good relationship with Healthy Food Guide, which I will talk to you about a little bit today. So if you look at some of these titles, you find these, how many calories should I eat to lose weight? Yeah, okay. Satisfying your emotional hunger. That's interesting. I always find this really interesting. As someone who wrote my PhD using psychoanalysis on the weight loss industry, and who has a degree in psychology, and a wife who's a psychotherapist, I thought I'd understand emotion reasonably well. But that 600 words, it wasn't life-changing for me. Making your calories count, how to lose weight by changing your thinking, top tips for winter weight loss, how slim people eat. This is the classic, this is actually used really commonly. If you talk to people who have been desperately trying to lose weight their whole lives, one of the things they do is imitate slim people. The problem, of course, at university is that if I imitate slim people, that means I eat wedges every day for lunch and drink a shitload of beer. Because all of the young 18-year-olds in my first year class are slim, and they all eat wedges for lunch and drink shitloads of beer, especially the guys. Probably not. At Massey we call that mum's ass. Massey University Meal Service. And my particular favourite, Claire Turnbull. Is Claire in the audience? I have a 3-part critique of her book, Lose Weight for Life, here, because she emphasises in this fad that there's a gap between knowledge and desire. I'm like, yeah. I first read about the gap between knowledge and desire while I was reading Spinoza, the philosopher who was the first critic of Descartes, when he talked quite a lot about knowledge and desire. And he basically said, yeah, we've got a real problem here, and people have been writing about it for a long time, but Claire's cracked it. I should watch out, this is being recorded. Okay, so what does this have to do with modernity? So I'm going to make a generalised link here. I'm going to link fadism, and by the way, I spell it with 1 D, Google spells it with 2 Ds. I disagree with Google. I'm sorry about that. I don't know who's right. We have to think about modernity here. So modernity can be characterised in lots of different ways. When we're talking about the period modernity, you think about that in association with pre-modern, modern, postmodern. Okay, you probably all have heard of modern and postmodern. You know, people talk about the postmodern this, the postmodern that. As a hint, you never want to have a postmodern dentist. That's not actually my quote, that was from anyway. You don't want a postmodern dentist. So modernity essentially, in the way that I'm characterising here, came around as a result of the Industrial Revolution. Okay, because we had a massively growing population, we needed to start thinking very seriously about how we were going to deal with that, and so a set of sort of attitudes developed. You know, some people call it the Enlightenment, which is an interesting way of thinking about things. But here we can sort of characterise it as a short-term, shorthand term for a certain set of attitudes towards the world. The idea of the world is open to transformation by human intervention. Okay, there's a humanism element to this, which I'm going to trace through this whole process and critique, and I want to be so have that in mind. And also a complex of economic institutions and the production of a market economy is incredibly important for the establishment of modernity. And then a certain range of political institutions which you can call the state, essentially, and the association things of democracy. Now, I'm not going to sit here and critique modernity generally, because I quite like democracy. I think as a form of management of or governance of people, it's quite good. It's just a pity that our government doesn't like democracy. They sort of practice what I might call vulgar democracy. It's like, it's okay to be democratic as long as what you decide is what we want to happen. They did this most recently with the Canterbury water environment, where they said, water board, where they said, no, we can't have democratic elections because they'll probably decide the wrong thing. People probably won't have it right. It's a bit of a problem, you know. I think I'd rather have democracy with bad decisions than totalitarianism with good ones. Okay, so what are the pillars of modern fadism? And I want you to think about Healthy Food Guide here, because the reason I say, are you all familiar with Healthy Food Guide? Okay. Who said no? Okay, so Healthy Food Guide is a very, very popular magazine in New Zealand, has a readership of over 350,000 New Zealanders and more in Australia. It is owned by one man, so there's an owner who's a capitalist who's not that interested in Healthy Food Guide, and it's run by I can quote this because I've actually written this in the media, a bunch of skinny, white, young female nutritionists, and they argue with me, and everyone got a bit angry. They don't know. If you go to their website, you'll find a series of things that I wrote back before I had any brains, which they leave on there on purpose to inspire people to realise what not to become, I guess. I've actually published in the Academic Press on it. It's quite fun. So I want you to keep Healthy Food Guide in mind, because to me this is the function of fadism. It's a function of modernity. It's the capitalist state, it's capitalism giving us something to believe as some sort of truth. Okay, and it changes all the time, and it's very much at whim to the range of things. But anyway, so what are the pillars? Okay, first one is humanist, and you might be thinking, humanist, that sounds good. Values the agency of the human. All right, so things like you can do it is a kind of humanist issue. I'm going to try and pull that apart, because to me the ethics of the ancestral health movement need to be post-human, and I'll explain that, hopefully. I'll try anyway. Second one is rationalists. This is the scientism that's inherent within the search for reason, logic and objectivity. And once again you might think, okay, that sounds pretty sensible. And modernity, I would argue, as a recovering scientist, is something that has given you the belief that you can be objective from within your head. You can avoid your subjectivity. You can avoid being you when you look at something, which I just say, that's ridiculous. Okay. Yeah. So you can certainly judge something based on a set of criteria. I have a problem with the process of science. So Darwin had no interest in objectivity. Karl Popper, the father of falsification, certainly did have an interest in objectivity. And he was best mates with Karl Weber, who was the originator of, I thought bureaucracy was the next one on the list. Damn it. I was going to say it was going to be perfect, but anyway, I failed. Who is the father of bureaucracy, which I'll get onto in a moment. So the next idea is individualism, which stresses the unit of the individual. Now, had Isaac been able to make it today, one of the things you would have got from Isaac's talk is that for indigenous societies, almost the world over, the idea of the individual is bizarre. Okay? For Māori communities, it doesn't make any sense. All right? The smallest unit they might be thinking of is whānau, hapu, iwi. Health is related in an entirely different way, a entirely different understanding. Individualism is essential for the capitalist economy. It's essential for modernity. It's essential for a fad. Reductionist. So, break everything down, look at the bits, forget the whole. Bureaucratic. Construct a controlling social hierarchy that enables us to be able to conceptualize where we sit in the scheme of things. So when I say registered nutritionist / dietitian, that's a bureaucratic hierarchy that teaches us who we should listen to. Commodifiable. There's an absolute essential nature of the market economy, of modernity, for things to become commodifiable. You must be able to turn things into products. Homogenized. Everything must be sucked to the centre. If you are not in the centre, then you should be either trying to be in the centre or at least telling people that you're trying to be in the centre. Right? This is, I've said this before and I'll say it many times, I'm sure. The only ethical position for a fat person to be in with regard to modernity is I'm trying to lose weight or telling people they're trying to lose weight. If they say, no, I'm fat and I'm happy, that's not okay. Because we just don't allow that. That's not okay. And totalitarian. Ironically, the pillar of modernity is the threat of the totalitarianism, which is why I constantly rail on about the problem we have with our current government. Because we might think we're a lovely social democracy, but the slippage of democracy is the threat of totalitarianism. And people don't realise, youth not voting, accepting that we can let Blinglish make a decision about Environment Canterbury without us having a say. You think, oh yeah, because Key's good, he knows who's right. So the slippage of democracy is really problematic. Okay. So now I want to turn to the dietitian's ethics, and Kate, if she's a registered dietitian in New Zealand, would have signed up to this code of ethics that I'm going to choose snippets from and pull them apart. But I've signed up to codes of ethics as a university person too, which I also pull apart. So we sign things we don't necessarily agree with. Okay, so these are five. I'm going to take five statements from the code of ethics of a practicing dietitian / nutritionist in New Zealand. Okay, and these are really representative of codes of practice all around the world. They're not weird, they're not particularly bizarre in any way, shape or form. They're very normal, okay? But this is the kind of thing they stay. And I've not cherry picked here. I've chosen apart from each of the kind of main sections. It's quite a comprehensive code. So, provide services that are evidence informed and professional with objectivity and respect for the unique needs and values of individuals without discrimination. Okay, so for me, they've already shot themselves in the foot. That's completely impossible. There's an ethical tension that resides in the heart of trying to be objective at the same time as realizing that someone is unique. How can they be unique if you're objective? They can't. You have to make them ununique in order to be objective. There's an inherent ethical quagmire that they start off with. Then make all reasonable effort to avoid bias, and they don't say except for the fact that you're within a human body here. I mean, which is what I'd say. And any professional evaluation recognising legitimate differences of opinion. So Jamie's opinion is not legitimate because he's not registered. All right? I clearly don't believe that, but you know what I'm saying, In interprofessional relationships, the dietitian has respect for practice within the professional bounds of competence and exercises objectivity, ding, in respect of differences of professional opinion demonstrated by other registered health professionals. So they're pointing to the bureaucracy and saying, okay, we're going to judge who is in the bureaucracy, and then we're going to say that we're objective because we listen to those other people who are like us. You see the ethical issue going on here? Provide sufficient information to enable patient-client to make their own informed decisions, but act as the patient's advocate or agent. So you provide them with the information and then require them to make an informed decision based on the information you've provided them. That seems slightly weird too to me. Informed decisions are a little bit peculiar. Don't worry, I'm going to rebuild how ethics should be, in my opinion. Okay. And they do not allow their professional standing to be used in the direct endorsement of commercial products. Fuck. I mean, sorry. Scientific evidence is the only basis on which a positive health statement should be made for the general principles of the product service it exemplifies. Scientific evidence. I mean, okay, so yeah. How many deregistrations do you think have occurred? In fact, if you look at how nutritionists are registered in New Zealand, what you find is that the ones who don't like the other registration construct their own registration system upon which they want to be registered under. You know, they create their bureaucracy they want to be registered with so that it makes sense for them. Okay, and all this is dependent on this one thing, which is included in their kind of glossary, autonomy, okay, which I argue and have done many times doesn't exist. Okay, so a person's independence, we don't have independence. You heard Jamie. What did Jamie talk about through his entire presentation? He talked about dependence. We're dependent on the environment, on other people, on what we eat, on how we interact. Dependence, we don't have independence, we have interdependence. I don't want my children to be independent from me because they are me and I'm them. We're the same, we're relational. Independence doesn't make any sense. Okay. What it does is it privileges the rationality that we fantasize people have. We want people to be rational, don't we? We hope they are. And yet we're constantly given examples of where that doesn't happen. And I say, okay, accept it. All right. So, I want to just sort of equate these ethics with these notions of modernity. And I've got two items highlighted in red here. I'm just going to flick through. I actually didn't mean to have these as separate things. I just don't know how to use PowerPoint that well, which is a bit worrying given that I'm a university lecturer. So we can easily equate modernity with the registration process that nutritionists, dietitians go through. We can easily do this. What we get to is this really weird ethical dilemma between humanism and homogenization. The idea that people are unique, that they have their own position, and the idea that they need to be homogenized. All right. And this ethical position is the position of humanism, which I argue doesn't exist in, say, medical ethics, and I'm sure the medical doctors here would have an interesting discussion with me around it, because medical doctors, when they approach their patient, they try to form a diagnosis, they think about a treatment option for that, and if it doesn't work, they think about something else. It's patient-driven, right? However, what you get in what I consider to be the real ethical position of a dietitian or a nutritionist. I'm using dietitian here because they've got a code of ethics, whereas nutritionists don't seem to need one for some reason, probably because it's annoying. So one might suggest, in fact, that the ethics of the current practicing nutrition and dietitian in most institutional private settings can be characterised by a psycho-socially mandated requirement to seek out the most humane method to convince their client of the right path to moral eating as determined by the guidelines according to which they've already been indoctrinated. So we know what you need to do, fatty. You need to lose weight and be less of a fatty. So the way I'm allowed to say that, because I used to be a fatty, well, you know, some like my young students, I guess still am. So I'm allowed to use the term, The rest of society is not, apparently. I don't know why. I think it's fine. So we know what you need to do. So we need to figure out how to make you do that. So we need to figure out a humane mechanism via which to do that. All right. So if I recently went and saw a registered dietitian, you might think, why? Why would I do that? The reason is that I have a son with a rare genetic disease, you've seen him, and as part of that he has serious eating related problems, and I won't go into the details, but we were required by the Ministry of Education to go and see a dietitian in order to be able to get special needs funding for school, for some reason. I don't know why. So I went along and we talked, and it was basically about how to process vegetables into things that he will eat, which is, how do we make him eat the things that we've decided are really right for him and the most humane method to do so. And I found myself being completely indoctrinated by the system. Yeah, I want that because I want him to eat vegetables. I really do. The minute that you're faced with a child with a rare genetic disorder that causes a range of problems we won't go into, ethics becomes marked. You can suddenly see, oh my goodness, if we're not patient focused, if we're not thinking about him and what he needs, then we end up with this system to which we're already indoctrinated that controls our way of thinking to ways that we wouldn't even imagine. Okay, so and I would argue even the enlightened, and I classify Kate as being post-enlightened, even the enlightened modern nutritionist just sees the normal categories a little bit wider, as if to allow for the appearance of difference while still maintaining faith to some sort of universal. And to me, thinking outside of this requires the acceptance of a post-humanist position, which I'm going to attempt to explain to you as an audience who hasn't probably... How many of you have had experience or understanding of post-human philosophy or theory? Oh, excellent. Oh, okay. So a few people...
Is that cyborg philosophy?
That's sort of an arm of it, actually, yeah. Or there's sort of there's kind of the vegan crowd as well, like Donna Haraway and others. But anyway, I'm going to try and just talk about this directly in relation to ancestral health. So don't get too sort of hung up on the academic kind of notions. These things are actually very straightforward. Okay. So what impacts does this have? Humans are not humanist. Okay, which seems kind of paradoxical. But we are already post-humanist. We already recognise difference, don't we? We actually quite like difference. Yeah? And I'm trying to relate this directly. And I think I've got some quite neat examples from the previous speakers, particularly from relating this to some of the things we saw from Jamie's discussion of what occurred in Christchurch. So we value difference, which means that we must resist modernity to resist the problem of fadism. All right. So to me, ancestral health is in danger of being sucked under the sign of fadism, as I think people like certain celebrity chefs who shall not be named just are. Right. We see this because of their association with modernity. All right, their association with modernity creates the recognition in the post-human human, of which we all are, as I've just sort of argued. We value difference. We recognise and we go, oh yeah, no, I don't like that. I don't like the way that they say this should work for everyone. This should be the way. So I think this means embracing irrationality. Okay, and I'm going to try and make some links here to some of the things we've already talked about. This is my pièce de résistance. My best bit. So, don't you love it when English speakers try to convert French into English? It's like the word jouissance. Does anyone speak French? So the word jouissance means, it can mean a part of the process of a legal exchange of property, or it could also mean orgasm, or it can also, I don't know why the French associate those two together. Or it can also mean that sort of point between pleasure and pain, like if you're a surfer. Anyone surfers? And you're just about to make it, but you don't. No, okay. So that point of pleasure pain. That sounded a bit orgasmic, sorry. And I'm still on video. Okay, so irrationality. So most people would say freeze, fight, flight, freeze, as being irrational, but it's not. We know it's not. Or, in fact, it is. Hang on. The problem is that we are trying to say there's something different about irrationality and rationality. They currently coincide all the time. If someone freezes, they're doing it because it's rational and because it's irrational. So the minute we try and bring these things apart, we are just reinforcing Descartes' mind-body discontinuation, which you probably work out by now I don't agree with. Okay. So those things, we are always irrational, we are always rational. We need to accept that and work with it. It's okay, right? That means that humans do stuff that's a bit bloody weird sometimes, and it doesn't mean they're not with the program. It means they're with their program. Okay. Collectivism. Now, I really loved how you're talking about, I don't know who did it, who talked about regulating each other's metabolism. Oh, okay, sorry. So the regulation of each other's metabolism, this occurs because of collectivism. It doesn't occur because we're individuals. So I'll give you an example. This really happened to me. So what you won't know about me is that I'm actually a very passive, kind of friendly, non-violent kind of person, right? You probably didn't expect it because I look like a really violent kind of guy. What you won't also know is that when I was 18 years old, I got quite badly mugged by a large group of teenagers in Palmerston North, because it's Palmerston North. I was lucky at that stage being 130 kilograms because I was big and strong and drunk, and I had a few resources and they were young and stupid, and I reverse headbutted one of them by mistake, which broke his nose, and he, the rest of them ran away, right, and then I ran away and I cried, right. And as a result of that, if you've ever been in that experience, it's horrible, right? But as a result of that, I started training in Muay Thai, kickboxing, and I have been now for 22 years, 21 years, right? So I hold several instructor gradings. You probably didn't realise this about me too, but I really love it as a sport, love it. I think it's a great sport. I think it's a really nice way of interacting with other people. But I don't fight competitively, never had any interest in that because I'm not that kind of violent. But anyway, recently, so I don't have these experiences where people attack me, except when I practice, have this kind of like things, and we've got mouth guards, gloves, and this young chap moved in across the road from us in this little flat, and he had a dog who was really aggressive, and he used to let the dog wander around the neighbourhood. This is quite recently. And I went out one day for a run, because I also run, and walked out my front gate, and there's this dog literally outside my house growling, frothing, and I thought, this isn't very good. So I rang the council and said, good bureaucracy, please could you come and get this scary dog off the street? And then I stood in and around the area behind a fence, because I'm not an idiot, warning other people not to come down the road, right? And then this young man came out, and I'd found out previously he'd just been released from prison after committing some heinous acts, and he'd had an awful life. Don't ask me why I know this. And he is still very partial to something we might call pure methamphetamine. All right, so like Jamie might be partial to coffee, he's partial to pure methamphetamine, which is a bit of a problem for some things. Anyway, he came out exactly the same time as the dog catcher turned up, and I was still there, which wasn't. I didn't realise about the drugs at this stage. It was a bit of a problem. The dog catcher was reasonable and said, to keep the dog inside your property, etc., and everyone left, and I thought, that's okay. And then I heard this, oi! And I turned around, and he ran at me. This is the first time it's ever happened to me in my whole life. So instinctually, I went for the foot jab, because, I'm not going to get hurt by this. And my wife is inside calling, don't hurt him, Andy! Which made me feel like a man. Right. But, like I can hurt anyone, especially a bloody meth. Anyway, so he stopped at the point that I had my hands up because I looked serious, I guess. And I was like at least twice his size. They're very brave. He was, And anyway, so and his pants almost falling off too. But what happened? So what happened is at that moment, all of my neighbours came out. Right, seriously, all of them. The little old lady next door, the scary guy with the big cars over the road, and his son, and everyone came out, and they started sort of, and you could see it wasn't like horde mentality. It was like they were worried about me. Right, these people I'd not met, some of them were worried about me. Why? Because they've watched me for years, coming and going. We're collective. We care about each other. You know, we're worried about each other all the time. All right? Our health is inextricably intertwined with the other. We want people. We want them to worry about us. We want to worry about them. Okay, and sort of in hand, I think with that goes with holism, the more than the sum of its parts. You know? The idea of the body is not just a machine, a category of blood, bones, and is there anything else in there? Organs, which we eat sometimes. Liver. Never been an organ man, sorry. So I think we need to embrace holism, which I actually think the ancestral movement does pretty well. I think we also need to embrace anti-bureaucracy, anti-structure, anti-routine, anti-institutionalisation. I wish and I hope never to see how to be a registered ancestral health professional. I think that is a real danger. There are people, I believe, who claim some sort of authority about what is paleo, right? Which creates this weirdness. And humans look at that like modernity. We find it weird. We're suspicious. We want to believe it, but we're suspicious. Anti-commodity. Real food, not corporate food. Huh? I can't stress this enough. The minute that we allow corporations to control all aspects of our food, that's the only thing that I sort of hold relatively fast to in terms of fundamentalism. The reason I'm so positive about real food diet is because real food tends to come from smaller places. Less processed usually, because the corporates like processing things, because when you process something, you can add value to it, you can create more of it, you can make it more, give it more shelf life, you can put more marketing around it, you can make more money from it. Okay? Hetero, as in people are good at certain things, and when we work together we're really good. Like in the example with the people being lowered from the building. You know, the fact that there's a mountaineer in that room is really important. That mountaineer in that room, and I don't know if this is the case, I don't know anything about it, that mountaineer in that room might not have been physically strong enough to be able to lower a certain person down, but someone else might have been there who just needed some coaching to understand how they could do that job. All right? So hetero, recognising people's strengths, working together, being part of the collective. And truly democratic. Not rules, not like Game of Thrones, which by the way I'm just seriously getting into right now. It's like awesome. Joffrey just died in Wales. I was so happy. Never been happier to see someone poisoned to death. So not rule defined, but acting as a steward. So if we were to use Game of Thrones 2, we'd be talking about the steward of the North? Or is that Winston Peters? Okay, so for me, ancestral health ethics is bound up in the respect of this type of ideal. Okay, to resist fadism, we need to resist modernity, and therefore to accept certain postmodern aspects. And